I know generally speaking, the Arabs were not people of calendars. In fact, there's another interesting discussion. I'll bring that in actually. This is a separate discussion. I was reading up some research just last week on this thing of Nasee. That, you know, there's this verse in the Quran that إِنَّمَا النَّسِيء زِيَادَةٌ فِي الْكُفْرِ. That what was this Nasee about? That a Nasee was that the Arabs would move the months back and forth to justify fighting and stuff like this. But this research that I was reading, I don't know whether I'm necessarily convinced yet, but I'm definitely wowed and intrigued by what I was reading. So the person writes it's an I mean, he's like an ustad. I'm trying to, if I've got the book here somewhere. Nope, it's right. It's over there. Right. So the person was writing that Nasee was actually a month. That it was like a month that the Arabs would introduce every 3 months or so to re-regulate and knock back the calendars. So the calendars would stay in line the way the Jews do it. So the Jewish calendars are also lunar, but they, since the time of Moses, I mean, and before that, they kept a lunar calendar, but they would they have a particular period where they, once again, the way we have a leap year, we have a leap day in February every so often to realign the solar calendar. They would have one every so often to realign the lunar calendar and to keep everything in line. Hence, that certain months would occur when it's spring, and certain things would occur when it's so on and so forth. And this, he was saying that, and it was quite interesting in this particular research that I was reading, that the Arabs used to do this, that Nasee, that this Nasee that they would introduce every 3 years or so would re-regulate the calendar, and hence the 4 months that were sacred. Allah says, وَمِنْهَا أَرْبَعَةٌ حُرُمٌ, that fighting was declared haram in them. Why? You see, his angle was why. Well, fighting ought to be haram anyway, so why these 4 months only? Because these aligned with things like the periods of spring, and when people where it allowed animals to reproduce, it allowed, for example, certain crops, it allowed people to take care of these, knowing that there could not be any attacks and destruction. So in many ways, it kind of assured the perpetuation of society, the longevity, allowing nature to flourish, allowing animals to kind of breed and to have offspring, allowing these things, because otherwise, if neighboring tribes were always just fighting, but this way they weren't allowed, according to this theory, to kind of have any bloodshed during this. And they settled with that, and that would keep their survival. It would ensure their survival. So, but the only way this would happen, because the lunar months keep changing, but every 3 years they would have the Nasee, which would realign it. So spring and these, and Ramadan used to be in the Ramda, a particular heat that they used to face, and the month of Hajj would be in a particular season. That everything was, it was meant to be in line with certain seasons of the year. But he said that according to his research, I was reading this last week, that that this continued up until the time of Umar, and in his time, his caliphate, that there were certain Jewish people that the Muslims had employed as well to look over the calendar and look over certain things. But this got dropped and they were sacked and removed. And then there was just a lot of issues in the Muslim world. There were things like, obviously, expansion, making Muslims migrate, setting up new cities. Then the time of Uthman comes, and you've got things like, obviously, favoritism and nepotism and all these things kick in, and whether that is an issue or not, and tribalism, and then fighting, Ali's time, and then the time of civil war and diversity. And so Muslims got so distracted that they never really thought about the Nasee, because the Nasee was something that would occur only once every 3 years. It wasn't something on an annual basis. And so that's interesting. It got me kind of thinking that that's a very fascinating theory. And he said, and later generations kind of forgot about it because they were never part of that. But my reason for saying this is that, and then later Muslims kind of came up with things like, oh, this is more awesome that we have a lunar cycle like this, because this way Ramadan gets to be on every day of the year. And they came up with their own reasons. But initially, you see, because if you look at the Jewish people today, they still regulate their lunar cycle. They don't move around every year like that, because every so often they have these kind of leap sections to realign everything. And they were the people of calendar and of book before the Arabs. The Arabs were not a people of book per se, or of the book. Now,